In one of my last pick overviews, we talked about Johnny Costa, who was the musical director of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And we talked about this pretty, albeit cheesy, grayscale, or quasi grayscale, picture I did of Johnny Costa playing the Celesta. In that video, we talked about the very common misconception most Johnny Costa fans have that Johnny Costa always played the jazz piano music on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, even in the early years. But that's obviously not entirely true, because he did play the Celesta very, very prominently in the show's early years. And another very common misconception most Mr. Rogers and Johnny Costa fans have about Johnny Costa's music that I hear very often is that the whole trio, John Costa's jazz band, performed with him on every episode. You know, they always performed live in the studio on every single episode, even from the very beginning. Well, if we're talking about 1974 onwards, that would be true, but that's obviously not true with the show's early years there again. As a matter of fact, we're not going to talk so much about this picture today. We're actually going to show several different Johnny Costa pictures for this special pick overview. I'm going to give sort of a brief history lesson, if you will, about Johnny Costa's rather jagged musical evolution on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. But first we gotta get rid of this picture. Boomerang, Toomerang, Zoomerang. Okay, it's gone. So, of course, as we mentioned in that video, this is another picture of Johnny Costa that I did. Johnny Costa used to be the only musician who performed in the studio in those very early episodes. He mostly played the Celesta, mostly played the piano, a little bit back and forth. And that was the way it is during the show's first 5 seasons, and just a few episodes from the 6th season. Let me put this down for a moment. I got some more pictures to show you. So, these are very old episodes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood that Johnny Costa played music on, where he was the only one doing the show's music at the time. That was 10:57. Nighttime in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Even episodes where Johnny Costa appeared on camera, he was the only one that was performing the show's music. And these last two are actually 2 of the very last episodes where he was the only musician doing the music in the studio. Now, beginning around 1973 or so, and technically slightly earlier than that, because again, the history's a little complicated, Johnny Costa had a bassist perform on almost every episode, and the bassist on most of those episodes was usually Michael Taylor. Michael Taylor performed on almost every episode from 1973 to 1975, and he was also he also did a little bass accompaniment on some episodes from about 1971 and 1972, but not every episode from those seasons. The drummer, Bob Rossforn, was not available on every episode at the time. He was brought in for a few special episodes, indeed episodes 1151, 1242, 1243, and 1280, were the only episodes where he got to perform with Johnny Costa at the beginning and end of the episodes. And of course, Michael Taylor was on some of those. Michael Taylor performed with Costa on a lot of the episodes from the latter half of the 1971 season. He was on at least 2 1972 Friday episodes without the drummer, 1205 and 1215. And then beginning in the 1973 season, he was prominently used for a lot of the episodes from that season. and he and Costa very regularly performed at the beginning and end of every episode up to about early 1974. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of fan art of 1973 season episodes, but this was one of the very last episodes to not have the drums in the opening and closing music. It's 1330 from 1974. It was just Johnny Costa and Michael Taylor on that episode. Confusingly enough, the drums were indeed used on episodes 1326 to 1328, but not 1329 and 1330. But starting in episode 1338, the whole trio was performing on every episode. Johnny Costa on the piano, Bob Rossborn on drums and percussion, and Michael Taylor on bass until at least 1975. They performed on the entire 1974 season. Again, Bob Rossborn on every episode since at least 1338. And Michael Taylor's last episodes were actually the second week of the 1975 season. The closing credits of episode 1400 suggest that he was the bassist on that week of episodes and not Ron Feudally, who was introduced on the previous week. And these are two of the episodes that the trio performed on. 1372 and 1399 was one of the very last ones with Michael as the bassist. And then in 1975, I have two different pictures to show you. 1975 was when Ron Feudally was the bassist for Johnny Costa's trio. This picture was drawn back in December 2022. And this one, slightly different, drawn back in August or September 2024. And many of the episodes with Ron Feudally performing in the John Costa trio have a lot of really awesome music and are among some of my favorite episodes in the series, especially episode 1437. The way Johnny Costa's trio performs at the end of that episode is mind-blowing. And then the version of the John Costa's trio that many of you are probably familiar with Carl McVicker on bass. That started in the mid to late 70s. They performed on just about every episode from 1979 up until John Costa's death in 1996. And Carl McVicker and Bob Rossborn, of course, still performed with Michael Morrix in the show's swan song years. And, of course, many of you, especially Mr. Rogers fans younger than I, are definitely familiar with most of the episodes from this era. Sorry, this was supposed to be a much neater presentation. I apologize. But yeah, Carl McVicker was the bassist on every episode at this point. So all in all, Johnny Costa's band, a very important part of the show, but it's also very important to remember that the drums and bass were not featured on every episode, as people may falsely tell you. They weren't used on every episode until at least 1974, and occasionally performed with Costa in those odd years between 1971 to 1973-ish. But that's all we have to talk about today in this long video. Thanks for watching.